What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in on today's video. We've got another one on the dually here. We just installed our very expensive but very awesome 5R110 transmission in the dually, and we actually got our external transmission cooler installed. I'm going to show you guys that, and we've got to do a little bit of wiring on that still, so I'm going to show that off. Last but not least, in today's video, we are also going to be installing a upgraded alternator, and I'm going to talk about some really important wiring stuff when you install a larger alternator, or even when you install a aftermarket large, bigger, badder transmission in the truck as well. So stay tuned. We got a lot of action packed today. Thanks for tuning in. So like I said, we have our transmission cooler installed. So as you can see, we installed it just on the inside of this passenger side bedside. We're about right in line with the exhaust. I mounted it this way mainly because it seemed to be the easiest way to mount it, and I think it gets really good airflow. You can see we've got it spaced out a little bit, so we get a lot of airflow on the back side. I know a lot of guys mount them kind of flat facing down. I just didn't seem like there was enough room to get it that way, so ultimately we decided to mount it in this fashion. Now from there, if we move forward, you can see we've got our nice AN lines and fittings there. We also have our electrical harness going around. We've got those tied up really nice as they go forward and then meet into the transmission. Now on the top side for the wiring, so what we did is there's you can buy basically shielded 2-wire, and so we had a big roll of shielded 2-wire, so you can see that's what we have coming up from the transmission cooler. One wire is going to go directly to ground, and then our other wire we needed to send a basically hook up a switch in order to do that. So the one white wire comes in, and we have these fancy, if you don't know, these Fords, they have a bundle of pass-through wires. So these are terminated ends that pass through the firewall so that you don't have to hack up your firewall. So we use 2 of those for our switch. So we've got one going in, hooking up to the switch, and then one coming out, and that one's going directly to battery power. This switch right here is actually for our BD tap shifter. This is for a VGT brake, which, stay tuned, we're gonna talk about that a little bit, and then I'm going to show you guys how well this thing actually works. And then this is for our transmission fan. So this is basically, like I said, just a 2-wire, power in, power out, and then we also have a ground wire so that it lights up when we flip it on. Now, the one thing I did not add, and to be perfectly safe, we need to add one, is we do not have a fuse in line with this system. So the derail system and that fan says that it's going to draw about 9.6 amps. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be installing a inline 15 amp fuse. So during normal operation, it's gonna draw about 9.6 amps. It might spike up a little bit past that. It could see 11 or 12 upon initial startup, but 15 amps should cover us in the event that we have a short somewhere or have any issues with the fan. It'll blow the 15 amp fuse and we won't burn our truck to the ground. So all we have is, like I said, just a basic inline fuse holder here. Like I said, it's a 15 amp fuse that we've installed. We're using 14 gauge for the 15 amp. Should be more than sufficient. We'll just plumb this in line, just like that, spliced into our white wire there, and we will be good to go and nice and safe. Okay, and there we are. We've got our inline fuse holder. We just got it tucked back behind here. That's going to feed our switch, and we've got it fused to 15 amps. Good to go. So now, before we jump into the other wiring upgrades, a couple of other upgrades that we're doing on the truck here, I want to talk about the grounding system on the 6.0 Powerstroke. The driver's side ground goes down to the frame. Only to the frame, not to the engine. It goes from the battery down to the frame. The passenger side battery cable goes down to the engine block. There's a stud on the front of the engine block that it goes down to, and then from there, there's a smaller wire that comes off of that and goes to the frame. Now, what I see happen a lot of times is the passenger side battery ground goes bad, whether it's because people have worked on it and so that wire's been on and off and it's been flexed up and down, whatever it may be, whether it's corrosion. It really doesn't, there's no rhyme or reason to it, but that ground cable fails quite a few times. I see it all the time where, and usually it's because the truck isn't cranking fast enough on initial startup, and I see that battery ground has failed, and so the starter's not getting good enough power and ground to start the truck, so it's not spinning fast enough. So one of the things that can happen when that passenger side ground cable breaks at the engine is you lose all grounding from the engine to the frame, essentially. So now you will get maybe a little bit of grounding through the engine mounts, but typically what you'll see is the majority of the grounding is going to go through the engine, to the transmission, through the drive shaft, to the axle, to the blocks, to the leaf springs, from the leaf springs to the frame. That is going to end up being what happens with the grounding system. Now, there are components that just cannot handle that amount of ground, and they end up typically welding together, and one of those being the transmission pump gears. If for whatever reason, the transmission pump gears, they will weld themselves together, and you are totally screwed when that happens. So, to alleviate that even remote possibility of us breaking our ground strap, we added a ground from the transmission directly to the frame, and we're going to be adding another one from the alternator directly to battery ground as well. So let's show you guys what we do for the transmission to frame, and then we will jump into our alternator install. All right, so when we get up underneath here, move our light, you're gonna see right off of a bell housing bolt, right there, you can see we have a ground cable now coming off of a bell housing bolt, and it's going to come up and around, and it's going to meet our factory ground right here. So for those of you that that know anything about these trucks, really, this ground cable is a factory ground cable. It's just a strap, and it's really common for that to corrode and break off, or guys forget to unhook it when they lift the cabs and it snaps. Well, I would highly recommend at least replacing that with a wire of some form that goes from the cab to the frame. But when you, and this is great even if you don't have a really expensive transmission. This is a good idea anyways, to add a ground from the transmission bell housing bolt over to this factory frame ground. So in the event that we ever have a grounding issue with our passenger side battery cable, this will save our pump gears from welding themselves together. We will likely have other symptoms, but at a bare minimum, this is going to save our transmission. So this is a huge upgrade, and highly recommended that we take care of this round. Okay, so since we now have electric fans and for our transmission cooler, and we will likely have electric fans for our engine to try to gain a little more power there, we decided that, oh, and we've got some extra lights going on here. We got the lights in the mirrors. Anyways, we decided that we are going to upgrade our alternator. The factory 6.0 alternator is like 110 amps at like 2,000 RPMs, and it sucks. It's just not adequate enough to keep up with all the electrical demands, especially like our FICM. But nonetheless, we've did a really nice upgrade here. This is from XDP. I've never actually ran one of their alternators, but we're going to give it a shot. This is like their mid-grade one. I think it's like 185 amps. And then I also picked up, they have this larger gauge power wire that goes to the battery. It's got a couple of fusible links in it. So I thought that was kind of neat, and it's relatively cheap. So I was like, you know what? Let's pick up one of those as well. And so it's going to go on to the same stud as your factory power wire will. And then you can see we've got our factory electrical connector there. One thing that is kind of nice, they do send spacers to raise this guy up, which our old alternator was hitting our ODOG's intake. So I was happy to see that this one had spacers. So that's pretty neat. On the back side of this guy, there is a stud. Actually, it's a bolt. Let me see. And this thing is stuck on there. So this is negative ground terminal. Use same gauge wire as positive size. So that is freaking cool. Also, is that they actually have a designated bolt on the back side of this for an extra ground cable. So that is the other big grounding thing that we wanted to do, since we're going to a larger alternator and we've got a really expensive transmission. We want to make sure that our grounding and power is adequate and sufficient enough for our needs. And so we just added, we've got now a more amperage going to our batteries, but on the flip side, we want to equate that to better grounding as well. So we've got a direct from the alternator directly to our negative side terminal. I had no idea that I had that ground post on the back side. So that was a huge plus. I was just going to bolt it up top here, but now we've got a designated spot for it, and this sucker should put out all the amperage that we're going to need for all of our electrical needs. So we're going to finish by buttoning this up. We got the belt and our little fan shroud piece there. And then let's go for a little drive.